Welcome to Gate City Chatter, a podcast showcasing the creative people and cultural happenings that make Greensboro, North Carolina, a leading hub of research, my friend. Staff from the city of Greensboro produce this podcast. We record and edit Gate City Chatter here with our friends at Press Play Studios in the Greensboro Cultural Center in the heart of downtown Greensboro. This is your host, Josh Sherrick, joined as always by my co-host, Matt Feltz.
Hey, Josh.
How are you, buddy?
Fine.
Yeah, man. Good. Happy Friday.
Hey, happy Friday.
As the youth say, happy Friday.
The kids.
We'd like to thank everyone for their support and continued energy and love for our podcast. Today we welcome an excellent guest, Chris Rhea, a great man, great researcher. He is the Associate Professor of Kinesiology for the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and Director for the Virtual Environment for Assessment and Rehabilitation Laboratory, also known as the VEER Lab. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Thanks for having me, guys. This is great.
Man, I'm so happy we finally got you on the pod. You do some of the coolest stuff of like anybody I know, and I'm glad that we can share it with all the chatterheads out there today. So everything we're going to talk about today is like really interesting, really fast forward, like futuristic kind of research, and you are leading that helm. So, I mean, I hope without the visual pleasure of like seeing a lot of this stuff, folks can like really digest what you do and what's happening here in Greensboro and how important that is. So, give us like a rundown, man. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to Greensboro and got to this level, and then we'll talk a lot about your research and the things you're doing.
That sounds great. So I originally started this venture as a physical education major. I thought I was going to be a teacher and a coach, and that's still very near and dear to my heart. Mm-hmm. And I have a lot of friends that are still doing that. To me, it's an incredibly important field that we don't dump enough resources into, given the obesity epidemic in America.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the route I was going. And one of the core classes that you have to take as an undergraduate physical education major is a biomechanics class, which I had never heard of biomechanics. And it's not really a word that's commonly used outside of colleges in terms of the normal lexicon. You don't take a biomechanics class in high school or anything like that, typically. And so I was really interested in this class once I read the course description, and it was the integration of math, physics, and human movement, and specifically sports, sports movement. And so I had been playing sports ever since I was a little kid, was always really interested in math and physics, but never really saw how I could pair all those things together. And so at that point, I was really stoked to take the class, really enjoyed it, ended up doing an undergraduate research experience with my undergrad biomechanics professor. And by the way, this was in Missouri. Oddly enough, my undergraduate biomechanics professor did his doctorate at UNCG.
Oh, really?
Small world.
So, you returned back to pay it off. All right, that's cool.
So he's the one that really got me very excited in this field. And then from there, with his help, he kind of pointed me to a few different places. Went down to Barry University in Miami Shores, Florida, to do my master's degree, particularly in sport biomechanics. So we did all kinds of fun things, like a 3D motion analysis of a golf swing, and what kind of music can we play to pump you up during a max bench press to get the optimal biomechanics, all kinds of fun stuff like that.
I do that a lot. I constantly experiment on myself when I'm doing presses,
And some in your audience may also know this phenomenon called cup stacking. It was something that kind of took up my master's thesis was on cup stacking. So what's the biomechanics and coordination of cup stacking before and after you've learned how to do it? And so that's where I kind of learned the tricks of the trade of biomechanics and using physics and mathematics to understand human motion. And there, from that point, I ultimately decided, all right, sports biomechanics is really interesting. There's not a whole lot of jobs in it. How much impact can we have doing sport biomechanics compared to if we were to go to, say, general medical conditions and so forth. So then leapfrogged up to Purdue University because their biomechanics program there in the kinesiology department was looking kind of at more, I guess, public health issues is a good way to kind of think about it. So falls in older adults and that kind of stuff. What can we do with biomechanics to understand why people fall, and what ultimately can we do to retrain them so that we can reduce fall risk throughout their lifespan? So that was a lot of the work that I did there. And then kind of did another sort of introspection and saying, all right, where's the field going? I think virtual reality is going to be a thing. And this was I was there at Purdue from 04 to 08. And so this is before virtual reality was near as common as what it is now. But there were some labs that were exploring the use of virtual reality for a variety of different things, and thought, okay, this might be a way to do that. A lot of my work in my grad program at Purdue was focused on using vision to walk around the world. So as you're walking down the street, somehow, usually, you don't run into someone, you don't run into the light pole, you don't run into the building, and that's all because we're using visual information. But what happens as our visual information degrades? What happens if we can't pick up that change in elevation from the curb going down? Well, then you are putting a stressor on the system, and you may end up tumbling. And so that's what a lot of my work was in, is how do we use vision to walk around the world and not fall over? So, looking then forward, I thought, well, if we could put someone in virtual reality, we could control the visual information that they're getting, because we program the virtual environment. So if we could control the visual information, that might be a way to control the motor output. Might be a unique way to retrain people in particular ways to reduce fall risk over time. And so then I started looking around, and there was a virtual reality lab at Brown University that had an opening for a postdoc. And so I applied and got in there and spent 2.5 years learning how we might be able to program and use virtual reality in this particular context. So that was my kind of post-grad training, and then job opened here in the kinesiology department at UNC Greensboro. And at that point, virtual reality is becoming a little more common in terms of people understanding what it might be able to do. And since that time, we have taken off and really developed the lab around the use of virtual reality in context of gait and balance and postural control, and really kind of motor skill learning in general.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, break down the term kinesiology at its sort of most basic. I guess a lot of people might not be familiar with it. So what is it?
Yeah. So at its root, it's kinesiology is just the study of human movement.
Right.
And so that can be from a variety of different perspectives. It could be from the mechanical perspective. That's where biomechanics comes in. It could be from more of the cognitive perspective. That's where sport and exercise psychology comes in. It could be from a developmental perspective. So how do kids develop motor skills throughout their lifespan, and then how do those motor skills change later in life? That's some motor development, motor learning. Could be from a physiology perspective, so people take blood and look at all the blood chemistries before and after. That's exercise physiology. So all of those subdomains are within the field of kinesiology. And one thing that I'm really proud about of our department here at UNCG, we have always been and have remained committed to being a comprehensive kinesiology department. There's a lot that have transitioned for one reason or another to, we're going to really focus on exercise physiology, or we're going to really focus on biomechanics and kind of let the rest of the stuff go. To me, there's some value in doing that if that's what's important to you, but to me, to be in a comprehensive kinesiology department means all of those subfields can talk to each other. So how is the brain connected to the mechanics, and how are the mechanics connected to the physiology, right? To have all those people in a department is incredibly important,
Sure.
and one of the things that we've continued to be committed to here at UNCG.
That's really cool. Virtual reality is so, like you said, it's kind of like all technology. It comes on pretty slow, and then all of a sudden it's there and it's moving fast, right? I mean, can you talk a little bit about either one, like, do universities embrace that level of like research at a different way? I mean, it sounds like they did it at Brown, obviously, but did you have to find a place that was passionate or at least interested in doing that virtual reality piece? And like, what is the normal, does every university do this?
Yeah, I think it does take some kind of forward thinking from the university leadership. Could be at the department level all the way up. When I was here in 2010 doing my job interview, the people that I chatted with about the potential of this, they got it, right? And I don't know that it would be that way across the board if you're interviewing an XYZ university, but here they got it because they're really looking for forward thinking in our department. This is one way that we could do that. What if we brought in this guy that could do VR? We don't know if it'll work because the stuff at that time was incredibly expensive. And I didn't know which direction the field was going, and I'm sure we'll get into this here in a little bit, but the virtual reality field has changed dramatically over the last 8 to 10 years. And so I had a sort of a pipe dream that I could only take it so far until the industry world took off with virtual reality. And so I think here we had some unique leadership at the time, and still do over at the university, that is very forward thinking, not just let's do status quo, but what are the next things out there? And there's a lot of great examples of this over at UNCG, between the joint school that we connect with at A&T on nanoscience and nanoengineering, but even in our kind of more traditional departments. I mean, you go to psychology, they're doing really cool things. You go to history, they're doing really cool things. You go to nutrition, and they're integrating with these big databases across the country, looking at food deserts. And so there's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah, it's really funny to see how once that the spark of VR has been around for a while now, but then once it really takes off, and then you start to see it becomes more affordable, and you see the widespread application across entertainment, education, and everything else. Like, it's all of a sudden everybody's doing VR stuff, and I'm sure it has a lot of application between different departments, but even just teaching and training, simulating these sort of often complex and a lot of the times situations that don't often happen. How do you do that in a way that accurately represents the job for somebody that is actually going to be placed in that position potentially one day? And back in 2010, it was a completely different animal than it is now. I mean, now you have these application developers that can produce these highly realistic sort of movement sets, motion captures, graphics, sound, everything that can really sort of replicate, really any sort of real world situation. And I think that it's really cool.
One thing I remember when we first talked about this, Chris, is you giving. I think I've been in the lab once. I think I've been to the lab, but for the layperson that's listening to this right now, and such a weird term to say layperson. That's such a dumb.
Silly layperson.
Sorry, listeners, you're not lay people. I don't even know what that means. But give us a visual of what you guys actually do in the lab, right? Sure. So this sounds really interesting, but what because I think you actually use a lot of participants to study on, but what could someone actually expect when they come to that lab?
Yes, so there's a couple of different ways that virtual reality kind of plays out in the lab. In its simplest form, it could just be a virtual environment. Essentially, it almost looks like a computer game that we created that you're interacting with. And so we put that on a big screen in front of the treadmill. And one example of that, that is one of my graduate students' projects, where she had people walking on the treadmill while viewing this big screen in front of them. And the speed of the treadmill was tied to the speed at which that environment is moving toward them. So it sort of felt like you're walking through this virtual environment, even though in your periphery, you're in this laboratory on this treadmill.
So they're not wearing headsets or anything?
In this context, no, because this is essentially the simplest way that we have used it before. And
sure.
Then, we could use the goggles, which I'll talk about here in a second. And so in that way, she had sensors on their feet, and as they were walking, they saw their virtual feet walking in real time. And then what she would do is she would put different virtual obstacles in front of them that they had to step over. So it's kind of like the Nintendo Wii game or any of the other games where you had little sensors. So you're interacting in this virtual space, in this game-like space. But what it does is it gives you a way to practice these skills in a visually challenging environment. You don't want to hit that obstacle that is coming up to you in this virtual walkway. So you end up doing the motor skill that we want you to do, but if you mess up, there's no physical consequence. Mm-hmm. So if I take you down the hallway and I set up these same physical obstacles and you don't do it right, you could potentially trip and fall, right? Mm-hmm. And we want to avoid that in all these kind of training examples. And so that's one of the nice things about virtual reality is you can put people in these visually challenging environments that give you a way to train up on these motor skills, but you're not going to get hurt. At worst, you're going to get an auditory cue that says you hit it, or you might, sometimes we change the color of your foot to red so you know you hit it right. So you get some visual feedback if I didn't do it right, so you can change your motor patterns. And that's the simplest way that we've done that. The way that is much more applicable these days is you can put on one of these big headsets that a lot of people have seen kind of out in mainstream media. These big headsets used to be these dinosaur things. In fact, we have one in the lab. We had a big one in my postdoc, and we bought a very similar one when I started here in January of 2011. And this thing, it looks like a Cooper Mini that's on your head. It's huge because what we could do with processing and visual optics and everything is very different now than then, right? And so not only is it this big thing on your head, but you also have to pack around this big old backpack, which is the visual computational piece, right? And this was right when HDMI was becoming wireless, and so we had to actually rig up our own HDMI wireless communication system between the computer and this thing. So there was a lot of in-lab engineering that had to go on back then. So anyway, you're walking around with this huge thing on your head and this huge backpack. It just doesn't feel real, right? You could do some interesting tests, but it doesn't. There's no way that's going to scale to being able to use that in a PT clinic someday or something, right? And this thing was expensive. It was $37,000 to buy this thing, right?
And that was in 2011.
Yeah, more than most new cars, right? It's crazy. And so it, at that point, was just a fun toy you could use in the lab to do some cool scientific tests, right? So then fast forward to what is it like these days. Well, these days you could walk to Best Buy, Walmart, Amazon, whatever, and get something very comparable to what we spent $37,000 on for a couple $100. You could also take the phone out of your pocket and with very low level, there you go, yeah, very low level, a couple of download clicks, and poof, you can turn that into a head-mounted display, essentially the goggles that people see. And so these days, as you said, Matt, like there's a lot of people that can do this app development. There weren't near as many people that could do that before. And so there's more people with the skill set on the software side of things, and hardware is really caught up so that we can merge those two things together. And now what that looks like is people come into the lab. We've purchased an HTC Vive, which is one of the, it's like an Oculus Rift. There's a few kind of competitors there, but they all essentially do the same thing. Really made for gaming.
Right.
That's who they're marketing to, right? So come buy this for a few $100 at Best Buy, and then you can have this immersive experience and be inside the video game, you know, wherever you are in your living room. And in fact, the first time that we got this, I was like, we should probably test this, right, in our living room with some of the games, just to make sure it's okay. All right, now it's good. We're ready for research. And so, so what we've done, though, is we've repurposed that, and we build our own VR games that are designed to retrain you how to walk or how to balance. So we are doing the software, but we're repurposing the hardware. So we port that new software into the thing, and then you're inside the video game that's testing your balance or your walking ability and that kind of stuff. So that's what the experience is like now. You come in, you put on this head-mounted display, and you're in this big open room, and you're inside the game, and you just walk around doing all these tasks in this big open room. And even though you know physically you're in a big open room, it feels like you're in the big open field or whatever virtual room that we put you in, because you can't see anything else. It's completely immersive.
Do you find that like patients forget like that they are in like I mean, do they? I mean, that's the goal, right? Is to get them into that to where they forget that they're in a space and they are literally in that virtual space.
Yeah, the visuals almost require you to buy in because you don't have any other option. You can't see around you. You have sort of a memory of the room that you're in, but you're inside the game. And so there are some people that are cautious because they're like, I think there's a wall over there, but I'm not in this big open space. But that's why we do some practice trials or whatever. But in general, it's a very realistic thing, to the point to where sometimes it's almost too realistic. And sometimes when we have, you know, university funders or high-level folks, we'll bring in this particular environment where there's an environment where you walk up and it's the edge of a cliff. And you look over, and then there's another like cliff on the other side, and there's a balance beam or a plank in between them. And you tell people, go ahead and walk across that plank. And there's a good portion of folks that refuse to walk across the plank.
What?
Because it is so visually realistic.
There's nothing like bringing in high-level sponsors and donors and just embarrassing them like in front of everybody.
Oh, please leave your checkbook at the door.
It's like those videos, the roller coaster things, when the phone applications first started coming out, and then you started seeing everybody like get their grandparents to do the roller coaster, VR roller coaster, you know, and they're sitting on the chairs and then they all fall out because it gets so wild.
Exactly.
It's pretty crazy.
And there have been scientific tests with that too, where they'll monitor like heart rate and how much you're sweating and stuff like that, just to show physiologic. This isn't a trick. Like your physiology is really scary. You're getting this stress response, right? But you were just literally before you put on the helmet, you looked around the room. You know you're not going to fall down. The terrifying thing though is if you do get off that plank too far, you do fall, and we have it set up where you fall 100 feet. So visually, the world is
right.
Yeah, and then I've done it, I don't know, 1,000 times, and it still gives me goosebumps when I fall off the thing. But it is that realistic, even if you know you're not going to fall. Visually, it says you might, and then that's a big enough response in your brain to go, okay, I'm going to buy into whatever this thing looks like.
Have you got somebody developing your programs and your games in-house, or is it an outside sort of developer that's doing that?
Yeah, it's a great question, because even though it's a little easier, it's not quite as point-and-click ready.
Right.
And so the way it used to be done is we had to buy virtual reality software. We had to code it all out ourselves. That's what I did for most of my time, my postdoc, and then my early years here. Since that time, there's been some open source software called Unity that a lot of people, even in high schools, are teaching Unity coding now.
Super popular program.
Yeah, exactly. And so you can do that pretty easily, and there's a lot of good resources out there, and so you can build a virtual environment. So some kid in their basement can do this and then turn their phone into a pair of goggles, and then they're in their environment they created. So we use that software now, so that means it's a little more accessible to the general population. What we have traditionally done, and a lot of this has to do with the educational piece, is I'll go over to the computer science department and recruit some undergraduates over there. They're looking for kind of a unique experience.
Right.
Come code in our lab, we'll pay you, hourly rate to do that, and they'll do that. We've had some really, really good good kids that have come through there. And they work in the lab for 1 to 2 years, and then they go off and go do something else, but they have something on the resume. It's like, look at these virtual environments, they could post it online. It's kind of this online resume piece that they can have that's a unique experience for them. So we've done a lot of that. We are just now at the point to where some of the projects that we have, they're probably getting to the level that we need to have professional programmers.
Right.
It's just above what a student programmer could or probably should be doing at this point. And so we've just reached out to a local company over in Raleigh that is doing this, and we're going down the road there. So in the future, I still want to keep the student education piece for sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But some sort of combination between the students are doing some of the coding and then probably the professional programmers doing some too.
Yeah, it's cool. We've started working with a company out of Toronto that used to be a game developer and has now shifted over, because that was I guess a really competitive field. They've shifted over into doing training games. So like for like certain types of welding and things like that allow people to, basically not ruin a bunch of resources, but still get that sort of, I guess first person experience out of it as well. But a lot of the same sort of immersive, art direction and being able to use the motion sensors and things like that translated just super well. So it's kind of a new space.
Yeah, there's people exploring this for teaching medical students surgical techniques.
Oh,
now,
right.
There's nothing that quite compares to whenever it's on a real human or cadaver, right? But the virtual is pretty interesting. We have some of these virtual cadaver dissection tables over at UNCG where they look like a huge iPhone. They're the size of basically a dining room table. But what they do is they've scanned in real humans but turned them into avatars. And what you can do then is it's a human that's a regular size, and you can take your finger and click on this huge iPhone, click on I want to cut, and then you can cut right through them, and then you can see the different pieces, anatomical structures.
Cadaver type stuff?
Yeah, it's all scanned in from real humans, just turned into an avatar. The cool thing, because it's virtual, is you can click a button and say, get rid of all the skin, only leave the muscles, and then poof, all the skin is gone. You just see the muscles are just the nerves.
Is there a wake up button? You can have them wake up.
That'd be freaky.
That'd be good stuff.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, so we've got the School of Nursing has some of those, kinesiology has some of those for all of our anatomy students.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So what, I think at one point you told me what specific injuries or like specific medical things are you trying to, or have you guys shown a lot of research? I think at one point you told me like ACL research was one of them, but tell us more about the actual kind of medical things that you're working on through this virtual reality techniques.
So we've been really lucky in positioning ourselves in the laboratory to try to help address some of these human health issues. So early on, we did a little bit of work with ACL injury prevention. So what kind of things could we, retraining of walking patterns and balance patterns to help people before they got injured, so retrain some of their biomechanics.
How cool if you got Zion up here. They're trying to train Zion Williamson to run differently because his running style, they're predicting that he'll be injury prone.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And there's a lot of work in that particular area in terms of how do we predict. Now that's the golden thing, right? If we knew how to do it, we would keep all these high-level athletes, and even your standard high school, middle school kids are doing that. But that's sort of a best guess right now. No one really knows the best way to keep anyone from getting injured. But we thought that virtual reality might have a space in there, so we did a little bit of work in there early on. We have done some work with older adults, especially those who have some sort of neurological injury. So we brought in stroke survivors who have a very asymmetrical walking pattern. And as you know, a stroke, once a stroke has occurred, it affects one side of the body, greater than the other. And so you end up with this asymmetrical walking pattern. We thought, couldn't we use an avatar essentially as a visual prescription of what we'd like you to do? And so we tested some of that a little bit, and so and we've done some work with older adults as well. So what kind of walking patterns can we retrain them to ultimately reduce some of the falls there? And so that's what a lot of our virtual reality work is focused on, is injury prevention, or once an injury or neurological insult has occurred, what can we do to rehab it?
You said the word avatar a couple of times. Explain what the avatar is. Virtual reality?
Yeah, so an avatar is really just a virtual human, and so you could have that avatar, that virtual human, that's driven by another human's movement pattern. So the same way that they do motion capture for video games and make the video games look so realistic, or any of the CGI in movies, most of the time that is someone in a big, a black bodysuit with those little reflective dots on it, right? And then they just fit an avatar skin over that. But you can also have an avatar that's kind of pre-programmed with some computer modeling of how it walks. So it's not derived directly from a human, it uses human principles to walk. But in either case, it's a virtual human that where you're using to either interact with or to use as some sort of visual prescription. They're moving with that very symmetrical walking pattern. I'm going to try to do that myself now. So it could be sort of like this coaching type of thing too.
That's really cool. So you guys have made some headway on these research. So what's the goal? I mean, is the goal to create these levels of research and then launch them into actual practice, or because I think a lot of people out there don't really know sometimes what university research is and how it connects to our actual built environments. So tell us a little about that.
Yeah. So our long-term goal would obviously be to figure out how it works in the laboratory and then scale to the real world. But that's a very challenging and time-intensive question. So we've focused a lot of how does it work, because you got to figure that part out first. And we have a few indications of things that might work well in the lab. Applied for a patent back in 2013, and finally last year it was issued. So we have a patent now in the laboratory that is it particularly uses particular gait patterns or walking patterns in the avatar to retrain patient populations. So there is an office at UNCG that helps get tech and other ideas out of UNCG, and so we worked a lot with that particular office in the patent submission process, and I think that's an incredibly important piece at UNCG and really all universities, is to ensure that we don't keep all these ideas in the ivory tower. It has to disseminate, especially at state institutions that are funded by state taxpayer dollars. We have an obligation to the public to get that information out, and that could be in a bunch of different ways. Could be working directly with the community in certain things, could be through patents that then kind of parlay themselves into business ventures or so forth. So we're committed to that long-term goal of rolling it out of the lab. The pipe dream is, at some point, we have something that's user-friendly, that you could just roll off the shelf, roll into a PT clinic, roll into maybe some in-home exercises and stuff like that, and someone clicks play and anybody can do it. Doesn't require high-level understanding of programming or anything else, and we're a ways away from doing that, but that's what the end point is, hopefully.
That's really cool. Yeah, I always thought it would just be really interesting to just be a person in that setting. I mean, do you use people from the community to do testing on and or not testing on, but to participate in the lab? I always thought this would be. I just want to come and just. I bet everybody just wants to come around and play around a virtual reality lab.
Yeah, we do, and we have a big group of graduate students that are in the lab right now, a bunch of PhD students and master students. Their projects and theses and dissertations range anywhere from young, healthy adults, so we recruit college kids all the time to come into the lab and do different things, to older adult populations that are healthy, to older adult populations that have increased fall risk or some sort of neurological issue. So,
what about middle-aged populations whose bodies are just starting to fail?
That's right. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because last summer I was at a conference in Scotland. This is the big walking and balance conference, of which falls in older adults is a huge piece of that conference, right?
It's a non-drinking conference, right?
No, especially in Scotland. I don't think you can't find anything but water in Scotland. And so that was what you just asked, Matt, was a very kind of not contentious, but an interesting set of conversations occurred there, because we study a lot of young, healthy adults because they're right there coming to the laboratory. We study a lot of older adults because they've fallen. We want to try to fix that. What are we doing with middle age, where we might be able to actually stop some of those spirals before they become problematic? And there's not much data on that. And one thing is, it's really hard to pick up when the system is starting to change. So when you transition from a young, healthy adult to middle age, you can start to feel it, but what kind of sensors can we put on you? What kind of tests can we say, all right, Matt's going to go this direction if he doesn't get something fixed, but he's going to go in that fall risk direction if he does get something fixed, right? And it's hard enough to do when they're sort of right at the cusp of falling, right? But if we're trying to pick it up on the early stages, that would be great if we could. And the common theme of that conference was, we need to do more with middle age because we need to better understand. We can't wait until the problem happens and then fix it, right? Let's start working with our 40, 50, 60-year-olds, not just focus on our 70, 80, 90-year-olds, right? We still need to dedicate money and time and resources to all those, but we can't have this kind of forgetting middle-age population we're just neglecting.
Do you have to like plan ahead for where that research is going, or where the virtual reality and stuff is going? I mean, do you have to like? I mean, I guess that's the whole point of attending international conferences and having these shared research opportunities. What kind of like planning ahead do you envision? I mean, obviously that's your role as the leader of the department. You really need to prognosticate, right?
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I mean, part of it is driven by the technological resources that are available, and it's almost even for someone that sits in this space 24/7. I'll get stuff sent to me. I'm like, well, that's really cool. I didn't know anyone was developing that, right? So let alone, the general population that doesn't think and work in VR all the time. All the stuff that's kind of going on. So, yeah, I think part of it's driven by industry because they're the ones that are making things scalable and oftentimes doing stuff behind the black curtain that you don't even know until it comes out. So one example of that is I really think probably in the next decade, if not sooner, probably closer to 5 years from now, we won't be talking about virtual reality anymore. What we're going to be talking about is augmented reality, which is the merging of the real world and the virtual world. So Microsoft created some buzz around this when they released several years ago now, the Microsoft HoloLens, where you
remember
this?
Yeah.
You also it wasn't near as big or anything, it wasn't a full headset, but what the HoloLens does is basically you can think of it as like safety goggles that you have on, right? And within those safety goggles, you can see the real world just like any other glasses, right? But projected onto those goggles is a virtual environment. And the way that you make those things look real is there's a sensor on the front of the goggles that's scanning the real world. So it knows where the wall is. It knows where the couch is. And then there's some really cool YouTube videos out there of how you can make a shark sort of swimming through the air, but it won't swim through the wall because it knows where the wall is. So you can see the real wall, you can see it, but there's this virtual shark that's just kind of floating around doing its thing. That's where we're going to go, and that's where the cool stuff is, because immersing someone in virtual reality is cool, but you can only take that so far. You really need this real world element to have it potentially have some sort of transfer to the real world, or some sort of retention over time as you're training people up. And so augmented reality is really where the future is going to be. Google had Google Glass, where those were on a similar idea. They took those off, and nobody really knows what they're doing behind the curtain.
I was gonna say, is that just? Do you think they just tested that out, like, and just check people's pulse on it? And then,
Google's got a habit of pushing out like technology, and then like supporting it for a little while, and then taking a few steps back, and then coming back a few years later to really sort of push it out. They're doing it right now with they got a new media streaming, and they're really working on this how to stream this high fidelity like gaming environment through their computers, like on the West Coast, to somebody on the other side of the world effectively without any dips in quality or anything like that. So I would imagine that you'll see another iteration that was built off the foundation of Google Glass at some point in time, probably within that 5-year span.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I think so. What really moved virtual reality along was in 2014, Facebook bought Oculus. Mm-hmm. So Oculus Rift was its own standalone thing. And then the whole reason it existed is the industry was really stuck on these big, heavy headsets I described earlier. And then there was a kid out in California that said, surely there's a better way to do this. And one of the major technological barriers was, imagine you're in this virtual reality headset, right? And you turn your head to the left. Your vestibular system, your inner ear canals, tell you instantly that you turned your head to the left. But if the visuals don't get updated in real time, now you have, I turn my head to the left, and then the visuals catch up, and that gets people real sick real fast. Mm-hmm. And it's motion sickness is what that is. And so the disconnect between moving of the head and updating in real time at a whole bunch of speeds that were going to be necessary if you're going to make this a home gaming platform, playing whatever games. That kid got that figured out, amongst other things. Wow. And so he did that in his parents' garage and got that all worked out. And then Facebook was doing sort of a survey going, how are we going to socially interact with people in the future? One way they think is that we are going to interact with each other virtually. So in the future, perhaps, maybe I don't even come down to this very nice studio, right? I'm in my living room with my headset on, you're wherever with your headset on, and then we have this dialogue, mm-hmm. but in a virtual room, a virtual conference room or something. Wow. Now, I don't know that that's the direction we're going with social interaction, but Facebook thought that might be a way we're going to go, so then they invested heavily in virtual reality. bought Oculus Rift for $2 billion. And then everyone else took note and said, well, Facebook is jumping into the deep end on VR. Sony, HTC, you name it, all the other big companies started devoting tons of money. That's what really moved the field forward. And this is only 2014. It wasn't even that long ago, right? And now all of a sudden you can go to Best Buy and buy these things. You can get on Amazon for a couple $100 just a few years later. So imagine what's going to happen when Google comes out with their new iteration of Google Glass, and then there's a whole bunch of other companies that are working on that kind of thing too. We're going to be in augmented reality sooner than later, but driven by industry.
Even just, I remember being in 2004, I was at a E3 in Los Angeles, which is a big video game entertainment expo. And there were virtual reality, I mean, real like Bobo virtual reality stuff. And like you said, you could put these sort of like goggles on, and this one you even stepped into a little gate. So it had like a pressure pad. So when you took steps, like it sort of didn't work really well at all. And it made you super sick. I think I put it on and was in there for 20 seconds and felt like I was going to throw up.
Wow.
Like it was rough.
Right.
But the way they've, sort of solved that issue with the latency and just the better graphical fidelity has gone a long way to sort of make it approachable to more people.
You know what's an interesting thought? Gaming is for fun, right? It's a little bit of escape for reality. You're talking about mainly research, but like it's interesting to think of this in like terms of afterlife, or not afterlife, but like the end of life. Like what if you're able, you're in a situation, where these people now a lot of times is just sent to hospice and they're laying there. Like, what if there was a virtual
This is
reality?
going down a darker path
Whatever,
than I had
man,
expected,
hey.
but that's
But
fine.
I have an example, not
yeah.
too far off that. So there's a woman over in Community and Therapeutic Recreation at UNCG, Judy Kinney's her name, where she's using virtual reality in a pain management situation. So kids at burn centers, when they have to get their dressings changed.
Oh, yes.
Right? And so that is an incredibly painful experience
Right.
that those kids have to do on a fairly regular basis. So she is using virtual reality, and others across the country have done this too, and she's testing the fidelity of some other unique pieces. But imagine you're a kid that has this situation, you put on the helmet, and now you're playing this game that is in a snow-filled area, you're throwing snowballs at whoever, right? It takes your mind off of this, and there's some physiological and psychological theories that actually suggest why this is beneficial. But in essence, it keeps your mind off of what's going on.
Yeah.
So you're in a cold environment mentally, you're playing this game, so there's a distraction, and then the nurses and whoever can change the dressings, and then you're done playing your game, and that's the end of it. And it's a great way to kind of manage your pain in that context.
See?
You did good, Josh. You set on
I
a good
knew-
path.
I knew I had a good idea. So you've got some I know you don't like to brag because I know you pretty well, but like you've gotten some pretty incredible accolades and kind of grants probably from some of this stuff. Is there anything like you would like to talk about, or you would even mention to say these are some of the things that we've gotten some extra money for and some supporters that sort of helping us push some specific narratives? I mean, is that worth talking about?
Yeah, I mean, I think primarily because while I'm helping lead some of this, we've been gotten connected with some other folks at UNCG. They're incredibly talented in this space, and oftentimes, they're the ones that need all the credit, not me for sure. So, because they're doing the brunt of the work. So some of the work that we've done that's fun in the lab actually isn't related to the virtual reality, but another area of the laboratory is we develop smartphone apps that we can use the sensors on the phones to measure someone's balance control. And because balance control is a surrogate for a neurological injury, we might be able to pick up when someone has some sort of issue. And we've really been applying this in the context of concussions and subconcussions, so these repeated hits to the head that don't result in a concussion, but you're still jostling the brain a little bit, that may cause some both short-term and long-term damage. So how can we use these smartphone apps that tap into the sensors as a way to kind of measure these things? And so some of that work has been funded by the Department of Defense. Oftentimes we think about concussions and subconcussions in the sports world, and plenty of those things happen there. But the Department of Defense has a lot of jobs that throughout all of the different forces that their job is to train people how to shoot one of these big shoulder-mounted rocket launchers, right? So in that case, they're getting a blast wave to the head, not only while they're training someone else up, but then they've got to back up and they've got to do quality assurance and everything. So part of their job is to take small level blasts to the head. And over time, that might not be great. Then there's all people who drive tanks. They're getting blast waves to the head. People that do the C4 demolition, they're taking blast to the head, right? There's plenty of examples in the military where subconcussive hits are an issue through blast waves. And so we've linked up with some colleagues across the country and measuring different folks in different situations and how that may change their balance control with our smartphone app. So that's been an area that I'm incredibly proud of, and the work that we and our colleagues are doing in that space, because it's ultimately helping military health in the long run. So that's a real big one. One of the other areas is looking at balance control, like I said a little bit earlier. So Dr. Louisa Reisbeck is a faculty member in our department. She's the leader of this balance control grant, where we're going out to Wellspring and some of the other older adult facilities across town and doing 12 weeks of balance training using very unique kind of specific cues, and then seeing how long it sticks, up to 8 weeks later. So it's a 20-week community training, balance training intervention.
Wow.
That she's leading.
So you train them and then and then measure them for
afterwards.
improvement?
Yeah,
Wow, that's cool, man.
Yeah. And so that's been a pretty cool project. And then I've got a colleague in the Department of Nutrition. This is our newest piece that sort of has taken off. He is interested in nutrition education. So how do we get information to people that might not always have access to that information? So he does some work in rural areas or low SES areas. And so one thing that kind of emerged from a series of conversations, how can we integrate virtual reality with nutrition education? And so Dr. Jared McGurch is his name. And so he is really focused on delivering a nutrition education program through an avatar. So there's this federally developed nutrition curriculum that's really designed for someone to be trained up, and then they go to a community center on a Saturday morning, and then they provide that information to whatever community that you're working with. And that's great. That's a great way to give that information, get it out into the real world. Mm-hmm. But what if you had to work on Saturday, you don't have a car, something happens, you just miss out on that opportunity, that community center.
Which barriers add up for people that need this support.
Exactly. So he saw virtual reality as a way that we might be able to overcome those barriers. What if we took that exact same curriculum but embedded it in an avatar that was delivering that information? And that avatar would then get information that you're giving back to it, and then based on a decision tree on the back end would say, okay, they now understand this piece, I'm going to move on to the next section. Or after you check for understanding, they don't really understand that piece, I'm going to loop back and give some of that information. And it's all also built in the context of the environment. So you put in your address, it'll tell you if you live in a food desert or not. Mm-hmm. And it'll also tell you if you do live in a food desert, here are some solutions. Maybe dried fruits and nuts is a way to get some nutrition, right? It'll tell you where the closest grocery store is. It'll give you some physical activity options and so forth. And all this is built in there in a project that we're doing for VR and nutrition right now. So there's some really cool work that's going on with my colleagues right now.
Yeah. All right here at Sparta U.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's not just Call of Duty, people.
That's right.
That's great. Well, this is wonderful. I love learning so much in these podcasts. It's so much fun. Well, I would open the floor. I mean, I have no more dumb questions. I mean, is there anything that we've missed that you'd like to add, or anything you'd pump up? I know folks can access your guys' work on the website if they just kind of Google VEAR Lab, VEAR Lab, UNCG. I'm sure they'll find some of your stuff. You had a TED Talk that they did last year. That's probably still out there, right?
It is.
Yeah,
it's on the website. Yeah, that was a really fun opportunity, because to be able to communicate this information in a very short and clear time frame is challenging. It doesn't matter, even if you do talk for a living, right? It's hard to...
What was your time limit on that? It was like 15?
10, I think.
10,
10 minutes.
I think it's like
10
we'll have to
minutes.
put that. We'll put that on the Twitter account.
Yeah,
and stuff
we'll
like
link
that.
to it. We'll link to it.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I think I'm just really appreciative of you guys, have me over, because the work that we do in our research group over at UNC, I'm really proud of it, and have, like I said, a lot of colleagues there. But just the Department of Nutrition, I think, is, and the work that's going on over there, the Department of Kinesiology, the other work in community therapeutic recreation. I mean, there's such cool things that are going on over there that I'm really glad you kind of selected me. I'm happy for that, but it really tapped into what UNCG is doing, and appreciate this outlet for people in Greensboro. They're doing really cool things. So
Yeah, right.
you know, this is a really awesome platform for people to come in and talk whatever sector of the community that they're in, and just happy to be over here representing
Right
UNCG.
on, man. Right on. That sounds great. Matt, did I miss anything?
I don't think so. I think it was comprehensive on your
You
part.
love this stuff. You geek out on some virtual reality, don't you?
I like gadgets in general.
Do you own any of the Oculus Rift
I,
or any of
I
any
don't,
of those?
and part of it goes back to the motion sickness thing. I get
You had a bad
awful motion
experience.
sickness, like really bad, just in general riding
I
cars
had
or
a
whatever.
bad
But
experience.
it is cool, and the accessibility of it is just in the last since, like you said, Oculus came out, and then PlayStation introduced their VR sort of capabilities and stuff like that. It's gotten so much more accessible. You can go down to Best Buy. You can use your phone.
Yeah.
You can download cardboard patterns to make the headset to slip your phone into, and then you've got your little headset right
Make it
there.
right there.
So there's no limits.
Yeah.
Super cool. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us, man. You are a great man. You certainly bring a creative thinking element to our community, and that cannot be underscored enough, man. You're a genius in your field and really doing great stuff here in Greensboro too.
You're
so,
a great man.
Yeah,
You're
thank
a
you.
genius.
Thank you for.
Let me see if I can get out of the door. The door might not be wide enough to put my head through.
Credit to your community.
No one can take you though. You have to stay here for at least another 20 years and finish your career here. But that's wonderful. Thanks for joining us today, man.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yep. All right. So thanks for listening again, Chatterheads. Gate City Chatter is once again brought to you by the City of Greensboro, the Arts and Cultural Affairs Division of the Executive Department, and we are in cooperation with our friends here at Press Play Studios. New episodes are recorded weekly or bi-weekly, and you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at GC Chatter, and you can YouTube us and just search Gate City Chatter on YouTube, and you'll see our shiny heads and smiling faces here in the studio today. So for my co-host Matt Feltz and our guest Chris Ray, I am Josh Eric, and have a great day.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.